That looks way more. Yeah.
Okay, so the barbarians, I went through a bunch of social, economic, political, and what was happening, the vast majority of the army, about 300, were basically made up of whom? Mercenaries, and they were what? Yeah, so like barbarians. So they weren't really loyal to the country. And what was happening to the population in Rome at this time? Yeah, we got plague and war and famine, all the great ones. In fact, I mentioned the bubonic plague. There was a string of bubonic plague that went through the early Roman Empire about 380. But it's one of those, for whatever reason, didn't really spread that much, and it would come back in a vengeance 200 years later, and that plague would last for 200 years. The constant living with a plague, as I stand there in front of you with a mask. And this is just something we're going to have to, well, maybe half the population died in those 200 years. So I can't even wrap my mind around the hell of that. And I went through a number of the emperors. Who was the last emperor that tried to bring the empire together after Constantine?
Vespasian.
Theodosius.
What's that?
Theodosius.
Yeah, Theodosius tried to, and he tried to also go back to the old Roman religion. By the way, what was the council in present-day Turkey that tried to establish or tried to set the rules for the church? The Council of Nicaea. And who were the people that said that Jesus was not necessarily divine? It was more complex. Yeah, the Arians. No, they're not the same guys with an I. The Arians with a Y, those are also people from, in fact, you could argue the Huns were Arians. Arians live here.
It was also spread. Like,
yeah.
It was all.
Or the country of the Aryans called Iran. We'll get to German lunatic mythology down the road. Speaking of that, let's go to, I'm going to ask you real fast. I'm going to run a copy for World War I. But why is Veterans Day on November 11th? Because what? What ended on November 11th? Yeah, World War I. Yeah, so you're exactly right. World War I ended, it could have ended, World War I could have ended on the 10th. But they decided to keep fighting for another day, basically, even though Germany had collapsed. So the war ended, and they wanted a dramatic date and time, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. And the assumption was World War I, this Armageddon that hit the world, where maybe as many as 20 to 30 million people died. And they thought nobody would be crazy enough to do this again, so this would be the war to end all wars. So it's going to be Armistice Day.
Until you get a small man with a funny mustache.
Well, it's more complex than that, but yes, he's part of it. But obviously, people were not quite. People were that insane to keep doing it over and over again. But the whole idea was, when it came to World War I, after World War II, they changed it to Veterans Day. In Britain, Canada, Australia, it's Remembrance Day. And there were a poppy all month there. And in France, they wear a little tricolor. So they have that color of their flag. And other places remember this, and they celebrate this. Now, the United States already had a day to remember soldiers, and that was Memorial Day. But the South didn't like that, because that was a Yankee holiday. And so I remember being told that by somebody. Well, they changed it to Veterans Day. What's the poppy? Why a poppy?
Flanders do. Just the where they fought had poppies.
That's just, even though you're right, Flanders Field. So Flanders is, even though, and poppies grow there all the time, this area right here.
So was the first.
Flowers grow so fast, poppies can grow. Basically, you have turned up soil, and in a week, you have a whole plant with a nice flower. And red's the dominant color, even though you have pink poppies and purple poppies. Poppies are pretty. But what had churned up soil? Specifically what?
Artillery. And bodies.
Freshly dug graves. So you have the dirt on top, and all of a sudden where they would hastily dig, I mean, they had to dig graves and get bodies in there as quickly as possible. And some of these battlefields, we're talking many thousands after one day. Like 60,000 alone at the Battle of the Somme, just British death. And they bury the bodies, and within a week, these graves that were all these just dirt would turn into these fields of flowers. So you're right, we remember those who fought. When I was in London in 2014, I made a wrong turn, that's when I'm in London, but I was in London, I went to the Tower of London, and there's a moat around it. And for the 100th anniversary of the beginning of World War I, they had 100,000 glass poppies in that moat for the entire year. And then they sold them off, kind of a raffle to help veterans after the fact. But it was one of those, oh, that's nice, you know, oh, that's nice. It was startling. Because the way the glass reflected the light, it was just really something amazing to see. And I thought that was an interesting thing. They did the same thing in 2018. When I was a kid, people would sell these on the street corner. And I don't know why they went away here in the United States. You don't see them as much. And it's unfortunate. I think this is a really effective way to remember that. Because it's the direct reference to those who died and why they died. And also a little bit about the futility of it. Yes?
Could the U.S. do something similar with
That's actually not a bad idea. They've done a couple things like that with the past, but that's...
Because that would be a lot.
Of course, the thing about the reflecting pools, anyone ever been to Washington, D.C. and seen the reflecting pool? And I've seen pictures of it, you know, it's to reflect like the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Monument. And you go, oh, it's so beautiful. Then you see the water, and the water is like literally purple. It's purple, wow.
Purple
Brown.
water.
You know, it's kind of dirty water, but from a distance, it's really cool. That's actually a good idea. Let's go. I like that. No, I wish that would come back. I think the poppies were a great way to remember that. I really did. So I always wear a poppy on Veterans Day. So with that, we got reviewed a few things. Let's go ahead and finish up the last little bits of the fall. Oh, who sacked Rome in 410? And it just took you like a couple hours.
Yeah, what do you think?
Who sacked Rome?
You did.
The Visigoths. And then I mentioned, did we get to the Vandals, and the Vandals swept through the Carthage?
Yeah.
Now, so who went into Britain? Angles, the Saxons, and the Jews. So we got to here?
Yeah.
So when they swept into Carthage, I should have one thing really fast. So, they heard about the barbarian invasion, and people living in Carthage thought, oh, by the way, this is Carthage. It's not in the same spot that the Carthage we talked about in the Punic Wars was. It's about 30 miles away. Rome just built another town and called it Carthage. Remember, they destroyed it after the Third Punic War and laid it with salt. But they, at the end, it's over. It's over. Barbarians, we're going to be strung up on trees. This world is obviously chaos. The only thing that matters is the afterlife. And that is where you get St. Augustine. Augustine was a monk. Yes, they had monks by then in a monastery in Carthage. And he saw the end of the world coming. And he would write what's called the City of God, which set the idea of monasticism, of going to monasteries to escape the evils of the world. And that is where monks would go, to a monastery to get away from the evil world and do what? Worship and pray. That's coming about 1,200 years later. And you think a lot of these would be almost like fortifications, these monasteries, because they're going to protect themselves from the barbarians below.
Isn't there a really cool one just inside?
That one, I'm sure there is, but I can't think of it right now.
I forgot his name.
You have to remember that one. There's one in an island off of Normandy called Mont Saint Michel. I'll show you pictures of that. It's unreal.
Is that the one where the water, the tide comes in?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah, it's really cool. And to escape, because what's the only thing that matters? The afterlife. And so that came, don't worry about this world. Get to heaven. So understanding doesn't matter. Understanding the world, all that matters is belief. And this will be a big shift. Also, a guy named Marcus Capello would save a little bit of Roman learning that would come back about 300 years later called the Seven Liberal Arts in Carthage. Kind of an amazing time in Carthage. The Vandals came, stole a bunch of stuff, and it survived. But then they went to Rome and sacked Rome in 455. Was there much there? Not really. They'd already been sacked in 410. And Rome was a population maybe a third of what it was 100 years earlier. It was, there were no more gladiatorial show. Circus Maximus was in ruins. It had fallen apart. In fact, the Colosseum and the Forum, within 300 years, would become like a quarry where they would just rip marble off and take it. That is the sacking of Rome by the Vandals. I took that picture when, yes, very dramatic, hyper dramatic picture of the Vandals coming, and this was done about 1600 or 1700.
So you were just standing on the side, taking
Yes.
a picture of them?
I take pictures and photographs. Hey, pretty down. Well, let's watch up the Huns. The Huns were another large group coming in, warriors, lived on their horses, fought from there. Famous for their light cavalry and small little horses from the steppes of Russia. And little horses, those little horses from the steppes of Russia, tiny, tough, sturdy, could handle the harsh winters of the Russian plain. And the Germans would find that out in World War I. They had these big draft horses. You ever seen like a Clydesdale? They look like that. And the Russian winter just killed them. Just killed them in about millions. And the little tiny Russian ponies survived. You have any Russian ponies?
I don't have a Russian pony, but I have a normal pony.
Not something.
No.
Just
Actually, but they're so small and they're tougher than nails.
Yeah, he pulls apart.
Just for fun?
Yeah.
Yeah, the little ponies are, you think they wouldn't be as strong. They're just doing it for business.
He's chunky.
This is
Cool.
cool.
So when they swept into here and pushed the Goths in, I mean, they were like a scourge of death. And all these rumors about the brutality of the Huns preceded them, and everybody was terrified of the Huns. And that's why you get all like the Goths running away to the Romans saying, please protect us. And then they fought them in battle. They were that scared. Now, the Romans, or the Huns were pretty fierce. But of course, anytime someone's going to come, it's going to be turned into this exaggeration of their greatness. But these are supposedly captive Goths being taken away. Here are Hunnish warriors and great light cavalry. They could supposedly ride their horses. They could ride their horses all day and then fight that evening. And if they couldn't find sustenance, what would they eat and or drink? Drink a little blood, yeah. Blood has a lot of protein. I don't want to think about it. Moving on. So, the most famous of these leaders would be Attila the Hun. And here shows the empire of Attila the Hun. No, this is not really the empire of Attila the Hun. He had no real control. He swept through and basically got tribute from everybody, basically saying, I will kill you unless you give me what you have. But he didn't really control it or own it like we would say, like the Russian Empire or a country today. But they swept in here. And at first they threatened the Eastern Roman Empire, and then they came into the West. And so Attila came in. That is a picture of Attila from, this is about 1300. I just love this picture of Attila. But those are the dates he was alive. He came from present-day Armenia, so that's right here. And he first attacked the Eastern Roman Empire, went against Theodosius. And what did Theodosius do? Bribe him. Yeah, paid him off. Paid him off to go chase after the Vandals. So they came swooping in here. Then, he was sitting here, trying to decide if he should invade into Rome, invade here, demanding tribute. When the Western Empire, the Emperor Valentinian III, His sister Honoria had been put into one of those arranged marriages. We saw that with Constantine. Remember, his sister had to marry and then they killed his sister. Okay. She wanted out and sent word to Attila that I'm being forced into this political marriage. Sent him basically a ring pledging not only that she did not want to get married, but perhaps I'll marry you, and begged him to come to her aid. And Attila's thinking, if I marry her, I could become emperor. How that works, it doesn't matter. Just wanted something he could say he had a claim and then kill everyone off who disagreed. So, he agreed to a marriage and would get half of the empire. And so, that was his plan. And so he invaded Gaul to make sure he would get this. What's Gaul? Modern day France. And that's how Attila did this. And he swept into Gaul, destroying city after city. Well, destroying is not the right word. They would ride up to the city and say, surrender or we will kill you. If you resisted, they would sack the city. If they didn't, they just would take a tribute, money, gold, whatever, and go on to the next town. There was no empire. They lived on their horses. But at the Battle of Chalons, the Catalonian field, and as you can see from
Those were the fields.
it's right here. I wanted to go here, but I ran out of time when I was driving across France. But 451, Goths, Romans combined. They weren't necessarily enemies, but they weren't necessarily friends. But that became the enemy, and my enemy becomes my friend. The remaining Roman force, a couple legions, along with a Gothic army, combined under the leadership of General Aetius. Here he is, right here. He had spent a year with the Huns. It was a hostage exchange. You know what I mean by that? To agree we won't attack each other, we'll exchange hostages. So important people from our place, Rome, will be exchanged with important people from the Huns. Implying, if one of us attacks, we kill the hostages. Yeah, this is pretty cool. It's pretty common. Well, it's pretty common. Should we do that with Helena High? Okay, moving on.
Helena High. Wait, which would be the hostages?
Probably somebody would complain. That'd be my guess. But this would be the last great Roman victory. Aetius, his forces would defeat the Attila, even though they were greatly outnumbered. It was a combination of the last remaining vestige of Roman legions with a strict discipline, and the Huns made a bunch of. Attila made some really bad moves. By the way, Valentini was furious because he won. And the thought was, if he won, what might he do? Become empire. And so he would have him killed. That's one of the problems. If you win for an empire like this, you might not last too long. So the battles list, as you can see from this easy to follow map. All right,
I don't think that's easy.
So what happened was a couple different things. Here's the main force of Roman Visigoths. There's Alaris, another Germanic tribe, but they ran away. Or actually, five were Romans. Big part of the Visigoths were at a hill nearby the battlefield. And when the Huns attacked, this group attacked the Huns in their flank, and the Huns panicked. And they went back to, remember I told you when they surround their wagons, I gave you a name for that? Do you remember that word? A logger. And they were able to hold out there, but Attila was decisively defeated. No, for a year. But then, he invaded Rome in 452 anyways. What did he use as a pretext? Honoria and that wedding with Honoria. And he said, I deserve half of the empire now, let me in. And they invaded. But he stopped at the Po River. And supposedly, the story that's going to be told for years in the church were that St. Peter and St. Paul, both of whom were executed by the Romans, by the way,
Like long before this?
Long, yeah, in the 50s AD. So we're talking 400 years before, appeared and convinced Attila to turn. Thus, it was intervention by God. And this is supposed to represent here.
They did what Jesus did. They just came back to life for a short time.
Well, not quite to life. It was more like angels coming back. But what happened was this. How do you think they really turned around? They basically scraped enough gold to give it to him and he came back. So they bribed him. They bribed Attila. And so he went back into what is now present-day Hungary. He was married, and in the celebration that lasted forever, supposedly drank like gallons of wine, passed out, got a nosebleed, and died.
Such an interesting way to
It's
die.
I was wondering about that.
Just to say nosebleed is not just a joke.
So this is a picture, true story. So this is a painting from about 1300, and you see that because it's Attila, so he has a crown, and you see the blood.
How long does this nosebleed go on for?
Long enough that he died. And so with that, that's the end of the Huns. But we don't know who Odoacer was. He was some kind of barbaric general. He was Germanic. It appears it's like he got some Huns, he had some Visigoths, Ostrogoths, maybe some people from Iowa. I don't know. But they all went in and they swept into Italy and finally finished off the Western Roman Empire. They basically arrived off the gates of Rome, where Rome was now nothing there. The walls were half down, most of the wealth was gone, and the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustus, and that's Romulus right there. By the way, if you look at that, the coins aren't near as detailed anymore, are they? And so in 476, Romulus turned over his throne to Odoacer, and that's it. The Western Roman Empire ended right there. You could argue 410 was the actual date, but 66 years later, it's over. And with that, this is where you get the beginnings of the Middle Ages. Now, we'll call it that. During the 14 and 1500s, when there seemed to be like this change in society, and they called it the Renaissance after the fact, they're going to dub this the Dark Ages. But actually, it was not quite that dark. But as we all know, that never really happened. Yes, it never happened. That's a conspiracy. But don't forget, they're still here. And the Eastern Roman Empire, they're still Roman. Even though they're all speaking Greek, they're still Roman.
The Roman and the idea.
And there's Romulus Augustus supposedly surrendering. Here's Odoacer. We don't know what happened there. They traded the kingdom of Odoacer, but then the Ostrogoths swept in. Theodoric the Great, who was a hostage in Constantinople, king of the Ostrogoths at 31, he invaded Italy, swept in, took Ravenna, and drove Odoacer out. And thus the beginnings of modern Italy, right there. And that empire would last until the Byzantines came to try to reestablish the empire. By the way, I already told you what happened to the Byzantines. Plague. The plague hit, and they had to give that up. So that's how Rome fell, and their conqueror would fall to the Ostrogoths. And so you get the Goths, the Franks, the West Goths, I love that, the Vandals, and then of course the East Roman Empire. And we're not going to do just England. So, that is the Roman Empire. Wouldn't that be a great, no, this is Jacksonian democracy, this is American history. Wouldn't it be great if you have to do an essay question picking either political, economic, social, or military reasons why Rome fell?
Now let's do two.
No, let's do it.
Come on.
You're going to have to do one short ID on one of those things.
Okay.
So give an example.
Oh, we can just.
And then you have the other choice. But I'm telling you one now, not be one of your short IDs. That's, that's good.
I don't know, it's really impressive.
Impressive, that's the word I was looking for,
Yeah,
impressive.
I'm thankful for it.
Are you?
I
Somebody, somebody knows a purpose in life.
It's awesome that the last emperor's name is Romulus.
Yeah, there's a bunch of Romulus. Yeah.
Yeah.
What is unique about the last emperor's name is Romulus? Who founded
That
Rome?
was the name of the.
Good job.
So Romulus.
Romulus. So let's look at this. Are there any questions? Are we ready now?
I'm ready.
I'll answer any question you have, but let me get remember.
Interpretive dance.
Yeah, interpretive dance. Yes.
What's the one of Philippi?
Philippi, that's where we at here? That's during the Macedonian War, and that's where the Greeks would be defeated in the Macedonian War.
Oh, okay.
So that would be a victory that would allow the Greeks or the Romans to take Macedonia.
Okay.
Yes.
Republic.
Huh?
Republic.
Republic? Yeah, Republic's kind of a big one. So that was a Roman Republic created after they got rid of the 5 kings of Rome, and they would create a representative government with the idea being based upon that they would choose, or that the people, those who could vote, could choose their leaders, could choose their representatives. Yeah, is that the right one? That one says, okay, that's U.S. history. So take that. And so the whole concept was that they would never let one person get too powerful, and so they would pick 2 councils to represent. The council is one we really need to know. The council is one we really need to know. Also, the other one would be the praetor, the tax collector, but they would represent the people. And then one of the most important parts of the republic would be who would represent the plebes, the tribune. And so that would be the Roman Republic. And that gave the people of Rome something to stand up for. I'm a member of this republic, we are Romans. But it would collapse with the war and empire. Someone else had their hand up over here first? Yes, right.
I don't pronounce it. Byrus.
I'll have the one.
Virus.
Where's it at?
Iris. Second column, second down.
Oh, Pyrrhus. So that was the defeat by the Greeks and Epicurus. And they would defeat a Roman army at Pyrrhus, but the Greeks lost so many men that Rome would eventually win the war. And that would be called, where we get the term Pyrrhic victory, meaning that, yeah, the Greeks could win a battle, but the Romans survived, or you win a big battle, but you lose so much, you lose the war. Yes?
Arch.
Arch. And that's the thing about the architectural arch.
Oh.
How important the arch was for construction, from everything from making domes to bridges to aqueducts. That's a big thing about the arch. Yes?
The Pontegard.
What's that?
The Pontegard.
Pontegard, that's the most famous of the aqueducts
Oh.
in France. I showed you the picture where I went to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
How many square Ds are there?
5.
But one you have to do.
Follow through.
Yeah. And then 4, I'll give you lots of choices. Yes, guys.
Varus.
Say it again.
Varus.
Oh, Varus. Where are we at? Where's the Varus?
Augustus.
Varus is the leader, the Roman general who invaded Germany and lost his entire legion when Augustus was there. So they lost their entire legion. That's Varus. So middle of the 3rd column. Is there another one?
Roman legions.
And I think I might put that on there for a short ID. We'll talk about the development of the Roman army, and that comes from Marius, who would make a professional army. And they would eventually divide them up, at first into mandibles, but then into cohorts, where they would have groups of men, basically the youngest soldiers at the front, and by age to the most veteran in the rear. With the idea that this professional, well-trained army would become the backbone of Roman Rome. And the legions were the main force, about 4,000 to 5,000 soldiers. Yes.
The Etruscans?
Etruscans, those were the people who lived in northern Italy. And there's not a lot of written about them, so we don't know a full history, but they appear to be the ones that influenced the Romans. They gave things like gladiators. They probably took the example of the art.
All right.
It's one of those kind of almost mysterious people, even though they have huge impact on world history. Any others?
They're aliens.
They're much like reptoids, yes. Oh, that's the idea of a family being run by the fathers. Paterfamilias, and so this Roman tradition where the father's in charge. A little bit like you might find in Athens. Sparta women have a lot more power. But paterfamilias, that's where the term paternalism comes from, which means like fatherly. Any others? We got Hannibal, Zama. Turn around, watch the father. Day of Judgment, Paul, Christos, persecution, destruction.
Do Augustus.
Can I?
Yeah.
I'd like to. So Augustus would be the first emperor, and he's the one who defeated Antony and Cleopatra at Actium. By the way, I think I have a question about Actium. I just asked who lost at Actium. Tell me the tactics of the Battle of Actium. That'd be a good question, wouldn't it? But Augustus would win at Actium, and he would make himself the first emperor. He's the one who took basically every title in the book. But the big one was imperator, which means essentially like a great general, great leader, and would become, and take that to become the first emperor, and kind of set up the idea of hereditary monarchy, because his adopted son Tiberius would take over. But it would be Augustus that would establish the leadership of the Roman Empire. That's basically what we know about. What's that? That's the battle we just had, Capitoline Fields, where the Huns were defeated. So, Alex. Huh? Oh, the Semon women, those were what happened so the old story was that under Romulus and Remus, the Romans, they're all men. And so they challenged the Sabine men to a games. And while the men were getting ready for the games, they went in and kidnapped all the women. And that supposedly is how Rome started, with Roman men and Sabine women. It's a little bit exaggerated to become part of this weird Roman lore. Like this is a good thing to be admired, that they kidnapped. And you go with the rest of it, what's going to happen to these poor women. She tells you a lot about Rome. Rome's an interesting place, isn't it? Yes.
What was the word for pope?
Huh?
You said like her emperor is imperator. What's
Yeah.
the word for pope?
Pontiff.
Pontiff?
Yeah.
The Pontius. Is that what that is?
Pontiff. What's this? Say it again.
The Pontius.
Oh, Pontius Pilate, that's the man who condemned Jesus to crucifixion. And a pontiff, that just meant leader of the Roman Church, but that became pope.
Okay.
Oh, Pontius. Oh, okay.
Any others? Most of these I'm just going to ask just a simple, simple is relative, right? But a basic question for matching, but then we got short IDs. Another question? I'm ready to do the test now.
What are you looking for like the ID of Caesar?
The correct answer. Anything else? Joke never gets old, does it?
It's a pretty good one.
Which one?
Caesar.
Oh, for Caesar, just something about, the big thing about Caesar, I'm looking about how he took power.
Okay, like.
And so after he after he defeated the Gauls, he crossed the Rubicon.
Yeah. Okay.
And would take power after defeating Pompey. But he never quite made himself king. But he basically made himself consul for life. But what's going to happen to Caesar? He'll be assassinated what day? The Ides of March. Beware the Ides of March. Friends, Romans, countrymen,
Lend me your ears.
I come not to praise Caesar.
It's like, no, I do. It's like,
Mark Anthony's speech from Julius Caesar. By the way, Julius Caesar, awesome.
It's kind of like the night.
So it's like.
Anything else?
I'm gonna go for it. I was just talking to myself.
Any other questions? Any other questions? Okay, so let me ask you a few questions. Who would kill all the people who wanted some kind of reforms for poor people and then die of overeating? You're good guess, but Nero was murdered. Well, actually, he wasn't murdered. He committed.
He unalived
Claudius?
himself. You have to be politically correct.
You remember? Look at the list. This is pre-empire. Who? Solon. Yep. Who? Oh. What was the first triumvirate? Who made it up?
Caesar.
Pompey, Caesar.
Other guy.
Cassius. Remember the really rich one? He's the one who had a molten gold poured down his throat. What a weird thing to say. Who were the guards for the emperor? Praetorian guards. Yeah.
So they never killed any animals.
They did what they had to do. Oh, who would be a famous example of somebody given the power, the ultimate power, with short-term power being dictator, but they would give up that power? And kind of an idea of the virtue of Rome, to give up power. What individual person? George Washington greatly admired him.
Cincinnati.
Cincinnati, not the city.
Cincinnati, Ohio.
Yeah, that's.
Cincinnati, yes. But it's no coincidence. George Washington would be a land speculator in land like that. And Washington was trying to get rich. Oh, who would be the very brutal emperor who made his horse senator, but be murdered by the Praetorian Guard? Caligula, yep. And who was the very successful, don't look at your note, don't look at the list, let's see if you remember this, the successful monarch of the Praetorian Guard made emperor, and would take Britain, build aqueducts, public works, lots of gladiatorial games. Someone said it? Claudius, yes. What river did Caesar cross? You already know all this stuff? Okay. And, what battle was Hannibal defeated?
Hannibal the cannibal.
I'm going to.
What battle did they defeat the elephants?
No.
You might have said it. Zama. What battle did Hannibal win? The great victory where they had the concave lines and then surrounded a bigger force with a smaller army. Maybe the greatest military victory in history. We watched the decisive battles about that. By the way, we could have watched the decisive battles on the Catalonian field.
We could. Why don't you let us watch it?
And guess which was the last decisive battle? Catalonian field. But I decided, this is a moral failing of me, I decided to help you review for a test. I shouldn't have done that. I should have just said, take the test. We have to watch Matthew 7.
Yeah, no, you have us watch that on Monday.
The Battle of Cana. Who are the brothers who tried to reform things for the poor and were killed with furniture? Yeah, the Gracchus brothers. Let's keep going. Oh, we're doing well here. Oh, who would be the decadent leader who would follow Augustus? He lived on Capri. Tiberius. Who led the slave rebellion? What was the foundations of Roman law? What were they called?
12 tables.
12 tables. We're covering a lot here. Are you guys ready?
Well,
Who divided the empire into 2, then 4 pieces? Diocletian, yeah. Oh, what's the kind of slang for trying to keep the poor occupied and fed to their rebellion?
you want to make
I think we are ready, aren't we? You got anything here? Any questions? Are you ready?
You probably
He's not.
No.
Oh my
No.
God.
No.
You probably would have been together.
All right. Oh, who fiddled while Rome burned?
Nero.
That's amazing. A little bit we remember. Don't forget that overriding issue of debt. We got the Colosseum. Oh, what is the Great Dome building?
Pantheon?
Yeah, the Pantheon. That's so cool. We should make one here.
How will we be able to build a Pantheon on our school?
Careful. What we would do is we would build a mound. And we'd build a mound with gold coins. And then build the dome over it. And then tell everybody there's gold coins and the dirt in there, and they would come with shovels and dig it out, and then we'd have our Pantheon.
Are there any gold?
That was actually a suggestion to build the Great Dome in Florence. Actually, I'm not making that up. That's awesome. Isn't that awesome? It really is. It's just, but it's not, we'll get to that. A guy named Brutus Galli. It's an amazing dome. It's such a great story. Yeah. So that's the, he'd be a Roman consul, but he's the one who kicked out Marius and would try to reestablish Rome for leadership of the patricians. And he would kill anybody who fought for the plebeians, but these guys died of overeating. So that's tomorrow. Short IDs, matching, diorama.
Also, why does every single Roman emperor have like U.S. in the name?
Has a what?
Like every single Roman emperor has like U.S. at the end of their name. Like
That's-
Augustus, Varus.
Yeah, I don't know enough about
It's like you have like a bunch of stuff. It's like you're
You've
doing.
got like Augustus, Romulus,
but it's been so long since I've taken any it's been literally 40 years ago.
It's like
I think I'm
or
Oh, now I gotta watch you guys take a chat. No, you have to take a chat. I got a good hunt from Great. I'm not going to.
I'll take another one.
Okay, clear your desk. I just asked good questions about that.
You're from the mountain monastery.
Who was it? Which one is it? What's it called? And there's so many really cool models. You know, I've seen
You don't know what monastery is?
I don't know anything about it. Where's it at? That's it. Cool. We're going, I'm sure they turned it into a mosque. Or a fort.
Really? Are you reading up my school? You need a 6. You need a 6.
I don't really have a lot.
No, 6 is like actually.
I'm going.
The same.
Yeah.
Just take it easy. I'll teach you. I'm not gonna stress you off. I'm sorry.
Goodbye, everybody!
What are you talking about?
Thank you for the ice cream again, though.
You want a slice of pizza?
Then I just have to make it small.
Yeah,
Thank you. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow! It's tested tomorrow! I'm leaving, I don't know. I thought I printed something upstairs. I raised dog, I just wanted to print one page. So I was gonna print,
That's great.
I'm gonna print a few copies for you guys. So we print about like 20 down. But instead of putting 20 copies, I put down page 20, there's no page 20. So I went upstairs, says, why did I print it? Well,
Page 20.
Oh.
page 20 of a 5-page document.
It's that much. That's great.
Where's your book?
It's
You made this stuff.
it's a Japanese.
I've heard the name before.
Yeah.
That's why I asked.
It came out in Japan originally as
I read a book about Warsaw too.
Yeah. It's during the 1600s.
I saw the name, I thought, I know that, but I don't know any details.
Yeah, it's super popular. It's like they were comparing it to the Japanese version of Hannibal.
Yeah, I've seen that before, that's why I had to ask. I saw the name, but I know that, but I can't remember any details.
Yeah.
So you guys are prepared to talk about the Middle East, about 1800 to 1950? You got it? Okay, good.
I started reading.
Let's go, Freddie, let's go.
Yeah.
So good.
It's
so hard. Good. I read for like 2.5 hours and read like 100 pages. Because we were just keeping up to each other.
Yeah.
Guess who probably disqualified for
So
science club?
oh my god.
I mean, you're gonna have science 18 because I definitely got paid.
It was good. It was so good.
I mean, I would feel so
And I
bad.
loved like, I don't know, I love
Well, I'll just say,
how
what if I
like
qualified
stuff
and
would be
then
really
what if I all C's?
I think there's no way.
Okay,
That's
that's
what I
right.
And then in the office, I watched it again.
You
Really
really
like how they interact. Cool stuff that's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
more like,
I love like I like the secret languages. I was like, that's how I make use of secret and
What do you mean by
like
30?
5 or 10 minutes.
Even when? What? What do you mean is left?
Brady's gone.
What do you mean?
He's not coming back.
Gone from home. I'll settle on that for sure.
He's not coming back.
He's big. He's huge.
Stop.
I'm confused by the way.
I don't know where he lives.
Oh.
He did say
Oh, you did
goodbye. He said goodbye. He was ignored.
He was loyal.
Yeah.
They caught, I actually don't know what they're talking about.
So he came in here for a second, for what? I'm so confused.
Hey, Carlin.
You identify yourself as a Douglas Democrat?
The only god I fear is
Yes.
Where'd you go?
I finally got the thing printed. Okay, so instead of giving you a few minutes to work on the map before we get that, I'm going to give you something. And you have Brady's line.
You nice. There's some Veterans Day event.
He owes you now.
What is? I gotta ask, what is that?
I've been working those remastered platforms.
Are they good?
Yes, sorry.
I like your flower. Does it represent anything or is it just one flower?
You don't know what it represents?
Veterans?
Oh, that's very cool. Is it?
It is actually. I'll tell everyone about this in a sec. I'll tell you why it's a copy. Yeah, I think it's the. I wish it was still used. It's not my meaning, the meaning. It's my personal meaning. No, I'll tell you what it means, because this is. All right, so you have to have the map done, and I'm also giving you a little assignment that's going to be due in a week and a half. Today. Is it good? And good for you, right?
Here's what's really good. So you can just read that as
Just maybe just make a law. I
kind of like that.
Okay, there's some rivers on there. For the Tigris and Euphrates, just put a line. I don't need perfection. Tip of the Nile, just put a line down. You don't need this. Now, for the Yellowstone, I wanted exactly the scale.
Two times ago, right? So 1 mile to the left, 2 miles to the right.
Oh, okay.
You did?
So I used to do it twice a week.
So you do the assignment twice. Okay, once I break part, no, yeah.
I'll talk about the assignment I handed out in just a second, but let's go and finish the map. Yeah. What was the radiation belt around the Earth?
Yeah, like.
The Van Allen belt.
What?
The Van Allen belt.
Oh.
Somebody's modeled it off the wall, and then we'll see.
The USA is radiation.
I know what the answer is, like, I thought I knew.
Oh, I would Georgia on the map.
I'm not today.
Oh, shoot, I don't know what we're working on right now.
I am now.
I'll let you use collective when you guys.
No, I'm giving you 10 minutes. Now we're down to 3 minutes. Do math. I don't know.
I mean, math is not even real, right?
And we'll talk about Sudan. Something happened there. Or the.
Did a good thing happen in Sudan or bad?
South Sudan exists.
It's Sudan.
We have South Sudan. We have 2 countries.
Yeah, true.
But there's still a civil war.
Yeah.
South Sudan.
Oh.
One of those areas.
Yeah, hardest.
Well, it all comes back to colonialization, you know?
Oh, well, if you look at Sudan, there's no reason for all that big block to be a country except for. There's 6 different groups. North Dakota.
Yeah, honestly,
There's nothing to do there.
there's nothing there. At least in Iowa, you have one abandoned home.
There's corn in there. I could go to the grocery store.